What's going on, guys? In this video we're going to be talking about the H115 Platinum AIO from Corsair. So the reason I chose this one over other AIOs is simply because everything else in the build, or a lot of the other components in the build, are from Corsair, so everything will work with their IQ software. It also has a 0 RPM fan mode, so if you're just like idling, maybe you're just running like 1 or 2 tabs in a browser, the fans are going to be off altogether and it's just going to be the pump running the system. So it'd be a really quiet way to do things. This will be in my room, so I don't want to have to hear the fans going all the time. Also, just a quick note before I start this, most AIOs are basically exactly the same. They're not all exactly, but they're very similar because a company called Asetek actually owns the patent to having the pump on top of the CPU. So that's why if you notice any sort of AIO with the pump on the CPU, they're all very similar in design. This is the newest generation. Corsair is the first company to have the newest generation Asetek pump design. Let's get into it. I would also mention that this comes with a 5-year warranty, so it's a lot more reliable than any sort of liquid cooled system you're going to have. So it's just the instructions on top, then you get the 2 maglev RGB fans. These are very weighty fans. These are really high quality fans. They've been around for a pretty good amount of time from Corsair. And then here's it itself. Alright, now be very careful when handling this because on the bottom of the head is pre-applied thermal paste, and you don't want to knock that off or really touch the head itself. Just leave that plastic on until you're about to install it. They're very nice braided hoses on this with metal fittings on the end. They're relatively movable. And coming off of it, you've got your headers for RGB and the fans and the pump. Got your pump header, got your SATA power, fan headers. And on the side, you've got USB for the Corsair Link software. You use this cable for it. So unfortunately, this will take up one of the USB headers on your motherboard unless you have some kind of like splitter. Like I have a Corsair Commander Pro, so I can plug this in and have everything talk to each other using the Link software. The radiator itself is relatively weighty. It feels like it's very densely packed fins. Be careful not to bend any of the fins when you're taking it out of the box. There it is. It's a little bit thinner than I'd like, but granted this is still plenty of cooling for most applications, just because this will work just as well as most custom loops will. There's only so much heat you could remove from just the CPU head with just a normal ambient temperature liquid water. So this is going to give you about the same cooling as a custom loop. Also, I went with the 115i because I do have an i9-9900K, so I wanted just that bit of extra cooling power. The usual rule of thumb for cooling a computer is you want 120 millimeters per component, then an additional 120 millimeters if you're going to overclock. So let's say you're just running a non-overclocked i5. You're going to have plenty of cooling in just 120 millimeter radiator. Here are the fans. Then here's where everything plugs in. You could use this if you'd like to. I'm not going to. I'm going to have them all plugged in separately. Very smooth fans, but one thing I don't like about this AIO is just the sheer amount of plugs it needs. What I've been still wanting for a long time for Corsair to do is just a one plug solution. Like have everything be transferred over, let's just say maybe one USB 2.0 header. Instead of having this cable and then these cables as well, then you have to have these come out all over to this. There's just a lot of cables you've got to manage and route to get them so people don't see them or they're not really very noticeable, things like that. Also, what comes in the box is going to be all of your mounting hardware. So you've got this for the AM4. So this is if you have an AMD processor, you're going to use this. If you've got Intel, you're going to be mounting this behind your motherboard. Here's what goes around it on the front for the AMD. But it comes pre-installed with the Intel bracket. So all you have to do is put this behind your motherboard, get the standoffs in, and then just make sure you have the proper clamping force. And also in the box is all of your standoffs and screws you're going to need. I really wish they would have had these all split up into like your different applications, maybe just for the AM4 or for the Intel. And that's it. That's everything in the box. Let's get it installed in the computer. Alright, the first thing I'll be doing is going to be installing the back plate for the cooler. It's already comes pre-installed with the Intel portion on the front. It's nice to have a little bit of 3M adhesive on the back. You know, this isn't necessary, but it's just nice so when you put it down in here, it'll stick to it, so when you flip your case over, you don't have to worry about it falling off. Now that we've got the back plate installed, we're going to install the standoffs. The instructions do clearly say which ones are for your Intel boards, but they do include plenty of the ones for AMD or all the different Intel socket sizes. But for the majority of you, you're just going to be using the standard ones that come pre-installed on the AIO pump header. I really wish they would have bagged the AMD and Intel parts separately, which would have made it a little bit quicker for figuring it out. It's pretty simple, but just for first-time users and people who are just trying to upgrade maybe a PC they bought pre-built, it would be nice to help novices. And once we've got these all installed and screwed in, we're going to go put the fans, attach the fans to the radiator. They do include enough hardware that you can just have a push and pull configuration. Obviously, it only comes with one set of fans, but you could add another in the future if you want to upgrade that later on, or if you live in a very hot area where you may need more airflow, something along those lines. And that's it. That's all I have to do for the case, just to get it all set up. Now let's move over to the radiator. Now I'm going to put the fans onto the radiator before I put it in there, just to make it easier for the way I'm going to install it. We're still making sure that we have not touched the thermal paste on the head. And I would sort of line it up how you want it in the case first, so you could tell which way you want to orient the fans, so the cables are in the best position for cable management, towards the back and then towards maybe the bottom or the top, depending on how you're going to run the cables once you have everything installed. So because I'm going to run it with on the top of the case, with the hoses on the right side of the case, once it's flipped up, you want these cables at the bottom so you can run them behind it and then run them through the grommet on the very top to the parts on the CPU header, because they all plug in to one location. We're going to be using the long screws to install the fans to the radiator, and then the short screws, which have the same threading, plus washers to install the radiator to the top of the case. Alright, now I've got all the fans properly screwed in. A couple things I want to make note of before I continue on. These do all have rubber dampeners on the side, which is nice, keeping it very quiet. Also, the screws, because they're painted black, they are a little bit hard to thread at first. You do not want to over-tighten these, though, because if you over-tighten these and screw up the threads and you want to someday change out the fans, like I will eventually, you don't want to have the threads ruined, or else you've basically just got a radiator that you can't screw any fans onto. Now that I have the radiator sort of figured out where I want it, you've got to line up everything. You want to be careful. You don't touch anything on the bottom of here, obviously. Don't touch the top of the IHS. Don't let anything ground. Get it to where it won't interfere with as little of other things as possible. The tubes are going to run this way, up and over the memory and mine. I'm going to run a 360 radiator here to cool the GPU, so I don't want to have this over here. The top is fine. You want to make sure you have decided if you want to do like a push-pull configuration, a push or a pull configuration. Then I would recommend installing the radiator up top first, running all your cables behind where you want it. You don't have to worry about cable management yet, and then putting the CPU head on top of the CPU itself. So now I'm going to screw in the radiator from behind. You're going to want to use the short screw along with the included washer. And once again, be careful not to touch this on the bottom. We're not going to be putting any thermal paste on top of the CPU. We're not like the Verge, all right? So just use the included stuff unless you really want to push overclocking. You might want to use some maybe better stuff like Thermal Grizzly. They've got some great compounds, or whatever your personal preference is. I'm not going to get into an argument over which is best. It's up to whatever you want to do. All right, now it's time to install the pump on top of the CPU. So you got to pull off this plastic piece, being careful not to touch the thermal paste on the bottom. I know it's upside down, but the whole case is upside down because it was just easier from where I'm sitting to do it that way. And slowly lowering it down on top. You want to try and wiggle it around as little as possible. Very loosely hand tighten it first, because when you do the final tightening, you want it to be done in a cross pattern, not just like 1, 2, 3, 4. You want to do it 1, 2, 3, 4, or whichever way, as long as you keep in a cross pattern to keep the pressure even, so you get the best heat transfer from the CPU to the block. Now they're all hand tightened. I'm going to start here first, then over here, over here. And that's it. You just want to make sure it's not overly tightened, but you do want solid pressure on the CPU itself. You can pull this off whenever you like to. And then route your cables accordingly, however you want them routed. It really doesn't matter. It's up to personal preference. Some people may say, oh, you should have routed these on this side, so you could have routed them over the I/O instead of over the beautiful RAM. But it's all whatever you want to do. It's just... That's the best part about custom PCs. You build them to how you want them, not to how anybody else or any company wants them. All right, now let's run this all back here, get it all plugged in, and then you should be ready to go.